Elon Musk admits the dream that made him cry. Elon Musk once said softly, almost with a trembling voice, "Dreams are not just stories our minds tell us in sleep. Sometimes, they are messages. Sometimes, they are warnings. And sometimes, they are visions of what we must build, no matter how impossible it seems." That night, he had one such dream. And it was the dream that broke him down to tears. A man who had faced failure, ridicule, bankruptcy, and even the collapse of rockets without shedding a tear, admitted that this single dream was what made him cry. The story begins quietly. Elon was not surrounded by cameras, not in the middle of a conference, not on a stage with bright lights. Instead, he was alone. Sitting by himself, staring out of a window late at night, in a house where silence filled the halls. Outside, the world was asleep. Inside, his mind was running faster than any rocket engine he had ever designed. The dream had come to him a few nights earlier, but its weight did not leave him. It clung to him like gravity, inescapable, unrelenting. In the dream, Elon stood in a vast, empty desert. The sky above was not Earth's sky. The stars were sharper, clearer, as if painted on velvet. The ground was red, stretching endlessly, winds carving across sand dunes. He was on Mars. Alone. But in that dream, Mars was not what he expected. It was not the bustling colony he had always envisioned, with domes glowing under starlight, children laughing in habitats, and explorers building the first city on another planet. Instead, it was silent. Dead. The structures he saw were broken, shattered. Machinery was rusting, unused. And the domes, those fragile bubbles of life, were cracked open, empty, abandoned. And then he saw something that made his chest tighten even in the dream. A single piece of paper, fluttering against the Martian soil, almost impossibly out of place. He bent down to pick it up, and when he read it, his dream self began to cry. The paper had only 3 words written on it: "You were late." When Elon recounted this, he admitted that he woke up with wet eyes. Not from fear of failure in business. Not from fear of bankruptcy, or criticism, or lost money. But from something deeper, the fear that he would run out of time before humanity could expand to the stars. The fear that humanity's greatest dream, the survival of our species beyond Earth, would be lost not because it was impossible, but because we waited too long. He said quietly, "That was the dream that made me cry." The power of this dream was not in its imagery, but in its truth. For Elon, time has always been the greatest enemy. He often said that he feels a ticking clock, louder than anything else. The window for becoming a spacefaring civilization, he explained, is not open forever. We either cross it soon, or we may never cross it at all. And so the dream struck him like lightning. It wasn't just about him. It wasn't about his companies, or wealth, or fame. It was about humanity itself. He saw a vision of failure, not personal failure, but collective failure. A future where the stars remained distant not because they were unreachable, but because no one dared enough, or soon enough, to reach them. Elon confessed that this dream stayed with him for weeks. He would be in meetings, talking about rocket engines or design changes, and suddenly his mind would flash back to that red desert, that lonely silence, that paper with 3 words, "You were late." It pushed him harder than before. Every delay became heavier. Every failed rocket test carried not just financial cost but spiritual weight. Because in his heart, he kept asking himself, what if this is the future? What if this is how it ends for humanity? But this is not a story of despair. This is a story of awakening. For in that very dream that broke him into tears, Elon also found fire. He realized that fear can be fuel. That the vision of loss can inspire greater creation. And that sometimes, the dreams that hurt the most are the ones that remind us what is truly at stake. And so he told himself, no matter the cost, no matter the ridicule, no matter the failures, I will keep pushing. Because it's not about me. It's about them, the children, the generations, the future souls of humanity who deserve a chance to look up at the stars and say, we belong there. Elon's dream may have made him cry, but it also made him unstoppable. That night, after sharing this story in private with a close friend, he looked out the window again and whispered, I don't want that paper to be real. I don't want our story to end with "you were late." I want it to begin with "we made it." And in those words was not just ambition. It was destiny. Because every great achievement begins first as a dream. And sometimes, the dreams that shake us to our core are not nightmares at all, but prophecies. Elon Musk admits the dream that made him cry. The silence of a dream is one thing, but the silence of reality is another. After that haunting vision of the abandoned Martian colony, Elon Musk found himself thinking about silence more than ever before. He described the dream to a colleague in a voice that was unusually soft for him. Normally, Elon's tone carried a mixture of confidence, calculation, and the occasional spark of humor. But when he spoke of this dream, there was no humor. Only reflection. Do you know what silence on another planet means? He asked. The colleagues shook their head. Elon answered his own question, it means we failed. It means there was no one there to make noise, to build, to live. It means we waited until it was too late. The words carried the weight of not just a man, but of a messenger. Elon felt that the dream wasn't random. He believed, deep inside, that it was a reminder. Some would call it his subconscious fear. Others would call it a vision. But for him, it was simple, it was a call to act faster. From a young age, Elon always saw time differently. While other children in South Africa played outside under the sun, he spent hours lost in books, reading stories of galaxies, artificial intelligence, and the fate of civilizations. He once said, when you grow up with the thought that the future could be better, you either wait for someone else to build it, or you build it yourself. But what people don't often see is how heavy such a belief can be. Carrying the responsibility of the future is not light. And so, when the dream came, it was not just another fleeting image of sleep. It was a weight pressing on him, a mirror of his own responsibility. The desert of Mars, in his dream, was not barren by accident. It was barren because humanity did not move fast enough. He saw not only what could be, but what could be lost. And that terrified him more than bankruptcy ever could. One evening, after weeks of sleepless nights, Elon sat with his children. They were laughing, playing, asking him questions about rockets, planets, and robots. He smiled at them, but inside his chest, he carried the ache of the dream. For he wondered, what if they never see the world I imagine? What if they never walk on Mars, never witness humanity's expansion into the stars? What if their future is smaller than their dreams? And so, as a father, the dream hit him harder than as an entrepreneur. He wasn't crying for himself, he was crying for them, for the generations, for the possibility that humanity's greatest opportunity might slip away. In private, Elon often speaks differently than in public. On stage, he talks of technical challenges, design improvements, reusable rockets, or solar energy. But in the quiet moments, when the cameras are gone, he sometimes reveals what drives him on a deeper level. It's not about money, he once said. I honestly don't care about that. It's about whether humanity has a future. Whether we're limited to Earth forever, or whether we take the leap. When he shared the dream with a close confidant, they asked him, "But Elon, why did it make you cry? You're already doing more than anyone to push humanity forward." Elon paused, his eyes fixed on the floor, then replied, "Because what if it's not enough? What if I'm too slow? What if humanity is too slow?" It was not self-doubt alone. It was the realization that destiny has deadlines. The dream became a turning point. From that moment on, Elon started to see every failure differently. When a rocket exploded, it was not just metal and fire in the sky, it was a delay, a step closer to the message of "you were late." When an investor pulled out, it wasn't just financial loss, it was time wasted, opportunity slipping. When critics mocked his vision, it wasn't just personal insult, it was distraction, noise, slowing down the march toward the stars. And yet, strangely, the very thing that made him cry became the thing that gave him strength. Because Elon realized something profound: when you cry for something, it means you care deeply. And when you care deeply, you fight harder than anyone else. He began to push SpaceX with even more intensity. Engineers described him as relentless, often demanding impossible timelines. At first, many thought it was arrogance or stubbornness. But those who knew of his dream understood, he was racing against the silence. He was racing against that paper on Martian soil that said you were late. To Elon, time was the enemy. Delay was the greatest danger. For in his mind, humanity stood on the edge of a window that could close forever. He once explained, civilizations rise and fall. If we don't become multiplanetary soon, we might never get the chance again. That was the real fear in his tears. That the door to the stars was open now, but not forever. And so, his dream was not just personal. It was prophetic. It shaped his decisions, his urgency, and even his moments of despair. When others saw ambition, Elon saw survival. When others saw rockets, Elon saw lifeboats for the human race. People often ask why Elon works so tirelessly, sleeping on factory floors, skipping vacations, missing birthdays, and sacrificing rest. The answer lies in that dream. Because in his mind, every day counts. Every rocket counts. Every delay could mean a future where the paper on Mars waits for us with 3 words written across it: "You were late." Years later, when he spoke briefly about this dream in an interview, the reporter was surprised. "But Elon," the reporter said, "you've already changed the world. Electric cars, reusable rockets, solar energy. Why would a dream like that make you cry?" Elon's response was almost a whisper, because changing the world is not enough if the world itself doesn't survive. Those words carried silence after them. Because suddenly, everyone understood, his tears were not weakness. They were love. Love for humanity, love for the children who would come after, love for the possibility of a greater destiny. And here lies the mystery: was this dream merely his subconscious? Or was it, in some way, a message? Some would say God plants visions in chosen souls to stir them toward action. Others would say it was his own mind projecting his fears. But whichever it was, the effect was the same: it moved him to action with a force that no criticism, no failure, no ridicule could stop. The dream that once broke him became the dream that built him. When Elon Musk admits the dream that made him cry, he is not admitting weakness. He is admitting humanity. For what is a visionary, if not someone who feels the future so deeply that it brings them to tears? And as he once told a room full of young engineers, never be ashamed of the dreams that make you cry. They're not weakness, they're direction. They're showing you what truly matters. The desert of Mars in his dream may have been empty, but in waking life, Elon Musk vowed that it would not be so. He made a silent promise to himself, to his children, and perhaps even to the generations yet unborn: Mars will not be silent. Humanity will not be late. The human heart is curious, it can endure unimaginable pressure in silence, but one dream can pierce it in ways reality cannot. For Elon Musk, the world had seen him stand unfazed through failures that would crush most. Rockets exploded in fiery fragments across the sky, engineers quit, newspapers called him delusional, and billionaires dismissed him. Yet none of these made him shed a tear publicly. And then came the dream, the red desert, the abandoned domes, the note that whispered, "You were late." That was what broke him. The days after this vision became some of the most restless of his life. He would pace his home long after midnight, scribbling ideas on scraps of paper, equations running wild across whiteboards. Sometimes, he would stop mid-thought and stare at nothing, his mind replaying the silence of Mars again and again. Was it just a nightmare? Or was it a glimpse of what could be if he hesitated? The question gnawed at him. One evening, during a dinner with close friends, someone asked him, "Elon, what scares you the most? Is it failure?" He shook his head. "No. Failure is data. Failure teaches. What scares me is waiting. Waiting until it's too late." This answer silenced the table. Because most people fear loss, not delay. But Elon's fear was different. He feared regret, the kind of regret where the future slips through your fingers, not because you couldn't reach it, but because you never moved fast enough. That was what his dream showed him. Not death. Not destruction. But absence. Absence of humanity's courage. Absence of action. And absence, he realized, was worse than destruction, because at least destruction meant you tried. In private moments, he began to write in journals. These were not for business, not for engineers, not for investors. They were for himself. In them, he wrote down reflections from the dream: time is the enemy. Every moment wasted is another chance for humanity lost. Children should not inherit fear of the unknown, they should inherit the courage to conquer it. I do not want history to say we dreamed of the stars and stayed asleep. It was unusual for Elon, who rarely dwelled on emotions, to write such words. But it shows the depth of how profoundly the dream moved him. And as weeks passed, his urgency intensified. At SpaceX, engineers noticed changes. Elon became sharper, more demanding, more restless. Timelines that seemed impossible were cut in half. Prototypes were expected in months instead of years. Meetings stretched into early mornings. At first, some thought he was simply pushing for efficiency. But when he finally opened up, he said something that stunned his team: "I had a dream that we were too late. And I cannot allow that to happen. Not on my watch. Not in my lifetime." Some of the engineers looked at him with confusion. Others with quiet awe. Because for the first time, they realized they were not just building rockets. They were building against time itself. But dreams have a strange way of not only haunting but also guiding. In his vision, Elon saw broken domes, rusting machines, silence. He began to think of how to prevent such decay. What if the first Martian colonies collapse after decades? He asked his teams. What if people give up? And so he pushed for redundancy, for self-sufficiency, for designing systems that would not just survive, but thrive. He demanded technology that could grow food, recycle air, generate energy, all without depending endlessly on Earth. The dream did not just make him cry, it reshaped his vision. Because to him, it wasn't enough to get to Mars. It was about making sure Mars never echoed with silence. One of the most striking moments came when he was asked during an interview, "Elon, why Mars? Why not focus solely on fixing Earth?" He leaned back, his expression distant, then said, "I love Earth. That's why I fight for solar power, electric cars, sustainability. But I had a dream once that showed me what silence on Mars looks like. And silence there means silence here too. It means we didn't survive. It means humanity ended with Earth. And I refuse to accept that." The interviewer paused, sensing the gravity in his tone. And though Elon did not recount every detail of the dream in that moment, those who knew the story understood. He was not escaping Earth, he was protecting its legacy. It is important to understand something here: Elon Musk is not a man who easily admits vulnerability. His life has been built on logic, engineering, resilience. But to admit that a dream brought him to tears shows just how deeply he feels his mission. And perhaps, that is the lesson for all of us. That even the strongest minds, even the visionaries who shape history, are still human. They still dream. They still cry. And sometimes, those tears become the fire that lights revolutions. As the months rolled on, the dream became less a nightmare and more a compass. Whenever Elon faced resistance, whether from governments, corporations, or public opinion, he reminded himself of the silence. When critics laughed at his goal of colonizing Mars, he thought of the paper on Martian soil. When investors doubted the profitability of rockets, he thought of the empty domes. When exhaustion tempted him to slow down, he thought of the words, "You were late." And suddenly, he would stand up again, push harder, demand more, not out of pride, but out of necessity. But here's the twist most people don't know. In the dream, after Elon read the note, he looked up at the sky. And in that silent Martian sky, he saw Earth. Blue, beautiful, fragile. It hung like a jewel in the darkness, distant yet close enough to remind him of everything at stake. That image never left him. He once confided to a friend, "It wasn't the words that broke me the most. It was looking up at Earth from Mars and realizing, we were still trapped there. We never left. We never grew." And so, for Elon, the dream was not just about Mars, it was about Earth too. It was about the fragility of our home, the urgency to expand, the necessity to ensure survival. Somewhere deep inside, Elon knew he may never see the full dream realized. Colonies take generations. Cities take centuries. But that didn't matter. What mattered was starting. He said it plainly, "Even if I never step foot on Mars, if humanity gets there, I'll be happy. Because the dream will not have been in vain." This humility, hidden behind his relentless drive, shows the heart of the man. He was not crying because he wanted glory. He was crying because he wanted continuity. The continuation of humanity's story, written not just on Earth, but across the stars. And so the dream, painful as it was, became a gift. It gave him perspective. It gave him drive. And most of all, it gave him something that even money and success could not provide: clarity. Clarity that life is short. Clarity that waiting is dangerous. Clarity that dreams are not always fantasies, they can be instructions. For Elon Musk, the dream that made him cry was not a nightmare. It was a wake-up call. And in that call, he heard the voice of destiny. The world often sees Elon Musk as the man of numbers, rockets, factories, and machines. But what the world does not often see is the man of silence, the man who sits alone in the middle of the night, replaying visions in his mind that no spreadsheet can capture. After the dream that shook him, those nights became more frequent. Elon was no stranger to exhaustion. He had once worked nearly 100-hour weeks at Tesla and SpaceX simultaneously, sleeping on floors, eating at desks, rarely leaving the factory. Yet even through the worst burnouts, he did not cry. Stress? Yes. Pressure? Absolutely. But tears? Never. Until that night. What made this dream different was not the imagery itself, it was the weight behind it. A silent Mars. A broken colony. A note in the dust whispering, "You were late." The dream was not about his personal failure, it was about collective failure. It was about the possibility that humanity, with all its genius and potential, would remain chained to Earth forever, unable to take the leap. The more he thought about it, the more he realized something painful: history is filled with civilizations that thought they had more time than they actually did. He read books on the Roman Empire, the Mayans, ancient dynasties, all once powerful, all eventually collapsed. And he asked himself, What if Earth is just another civilization waiting to collapse? What if our moment to expand to the stars is now, and if we miss it, it never comes again? This thought haunted him. He once told a close confidant, "I don't think people realize how fragile civilizations are. They think things will always be stable. But history proves otherwise. If we wait too long, we may never get another chance." The dream wasn't just a fear. It was a reminder of history's warnings. As weeks passed, Elon began to speak differently in his private meetings. Engineers noticed his urgency was sharper, his deadlines more aggressive. "Why so fast?" one asked him after yet another timeline was cut in half. Elon looked at him and said, "Because I saw what happens when we're late." He did not elaborate. But his team understood enough. They saw the fire in his eyes, a fire born not from arrogance, but from desperation. What many don't know is that Elon shared the dream with his children, too. One evening, after dinner, he told them about the red desert, the silence, and the paper in the sand. They listened quietly, wide-eyed. One of them asked softly, "Dad, will that really happen?" Elon leaned closer, put his hand on his child's shoulder, and said, "Not if we move fast enough. Not if we keep building. That's why I do what I do, so you, and kids like you, can have a future among the stars." It wasn't a bedtime story. It was a lesson. And perhaps it was also Elon's way of reminding himself why he must never stop. Publicly, Elon rarely spoke of the tears. But privately, those who were close to him knew that the dream had awakened something deeper than ambition. It had awakened vulnerability. For Elon Musk, vulnerability did not mean weakness. It meant humanity. It meant caring so much about something that it hurts. And in his case, that something was not money, not status, not recognition, it was the survival of the species itself. And so the dream that once broke him became a kind of sacred burden. He carried it like a weight on his shoulders, invisible to the world, yet guiding every decision he made. In the months that followed, Elon pushed SpaceX harder than ever. The failures did not stop, rockets still exploded, prototypes still collapsed. But each failure carried new meaning for him. When engineers were discouraged after a failed launch, Elon gathered them together and said, "This isn't failure. This is data. And every day we waste is a day closer to silence. So let's move faster." He wasn't just motivating them with numbers, he was motivating them with destiny. And strangely, that vulnerability, that urgency, inspired people more than pure confidence ever could. Because when they saw their leader cry for the dream of humanity, they realized this wasn't just business. It was something greater. But Elon's tears were not only for Mars. They were also for Earth. In the dream, after reading the note on Martian soil, he looked up and saw Earth hanging in the sky, a fragile blue world floating in the vast blackness. That vision stayed with him. It reminded him that Earth itself was temporary. That the very ground we take for granted is only a thin layer of safety between life and extinction. That was why he poured himself not only into rockets, but also into electric cars, solar power, batteries, artificial intelligence. He once explained it this way: "I don't think we should choose between Earth and Mars. We must protect Earth while also preparing for the stars. Both are necessary. The dream was not telling him to abandon Earth, it was telling him to expand Earth. To take its light to the stars before it was too late. One night, while walking through a SpaceX hangar, Elon paused beside a half-assembled rocket. He ran his hand along the cold metal and whispered, "You're not just steel. You're hope. You're the answer to silence." No one else was in the room. No cameras, no audience. Just a man and a rocket, and the memory of a dream that would not let him rest. It's easy to think of Elon Musk as unshakable, a man of endless confidence. But the truth is far more human. He has doubts. He has fears. He has nights where he wakes up sweating, heart racing, the vision of silence burning in his mind. But what makes him extraordinary is not that he is free of fear, but that he lets fear fuel him. He takes the dream that made him cry and transforms it into the fire that makes him act. And perhaps, that is the lesson for all of us. The things that move us to tears are not weaknesses, they are clues. They point us toward what matters most. Elon once told a group of students, "If you ever have a dream that makes you cry, don't ignore it. That's your heart showing you the future you don't want. That's your chance to change it." Those words were not theoretical. They were born from his own midnight vision. From his own tears. From his own note in the dust that read, "You were late." And so, when Elon Musk admits the dream that made him cry, he is not telling the world about sadness. He is telling the world about urgency. About responsibility. About destiny. He is telling us that time is running out, that silence is closer than we think, and that the only way to avoid it is to act now. For in the end, his tears were not for himself. They were for all of us. The paper in the Martian sand was only 3 words long, "You were late." Yet those words carried more weight than 1,000 failures, more gravity than the pull of any planet. For Elon Musk, the dream was not just a passing nightmare, it was a mirror. A mirror showing him not what is, but what could be if humanity hesitated. And sometimes, seeing the shadow of what could be is more terrifying than facing the harshness of reality. He would later say in private conversation, that dream was a warning. Not from anyone else, not from God, not from fate, maybe just from my own mind. But it doesn't matter where it came from. It mattered that I listened. The days following the dream became chapters of intensity. Elon had always been known for his relentless drive, but now, it seemed as though he carried an invisible clock with him everywhere. Tick. 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 Each second that passed felt like another step toward the silence he had witnessed. Colleagues noticed his restlessness. Meetings that once ended with calm conclusions now ended with sudden urgency. "No," he would say. "We can't wait. We need to test it sooner. We need to launch earlier. We don't have time." One engineer recalled a late-night session when Elon paused, staring at a design flaw on a rocket schematic. Instead of his usual technical critique, he muttered under his breath, "If we're late, it won't matter how perfect the design is." Those words puzzled the team. But for Elon, they were everything. In quiet moments, the dream returned to him with new layers. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could still see the Martian horizon, endless and red, stretching like an ocean of dust. The silence in the dream wasn't just the absence of life, it was the absence of hope. And yet, what haunted him most wasn't the barren soil. It was the message left behind. Someone, or something, had written those words, "You were late." Who had written them? In the dream, Elon never saw. But in waking life, he imagined. Perhaps it was humanity itself, leaving a message for its own future. Perhaps it was his own conscience. Or perhaps, in some strange way, it was a vision of the children of tomorrow, children who would never exist if humanity failed to expand. It was then that Elon began speaking differently in his rare reflective moods. He would say things that startled even his closest allies. "I don't care about being remembered," he admitted once. "I care about whether humanity remembers itself. Whether we survive long enough to even have a memory beyond Earth." When asked if he ever worried about his own legacy, he shook his head. Legacies are useless if there's no one left to read them. This raw honesty revealed the true weight of the dream. It was not about ego. It was about existence. One evening, he was walking through a Tesla factory, surrounded by the hum of machines and sparks of welding. A journalist following him asked, half jokingly, "Elon, what keeps you awake at night?" The journalist expected an answer about production, supply chains, or technology. Instead, Elon stopped, turned, and said, "The thought that we might not make it off Earth in time." The journalist laughed nervously, unsure if he was serious. But Elon's face carried no smile. Only silence. The more he spoke of the dream, the clearer it became to those around him that it was not simply fear, it was prophecy. Not prophecy in the mystical sense, but in the sense of direction. A dream that did not predict the future, but warned of the future if no one acted. And so, Elon acted. With renewed force. When Falcon 9 first succeeded in landing a booster, the world celebrated. Elon smiled, but inside, he whispered to himself, one step further from silence. When Starship prototypes collapsed in fiery crashes, others groaned at failure. Elon, though frustrated, reminded himself, better now than later. Every test brings us closer to being on time. When critics mocked his deadlines as unrealistic, he shrugged. For in his mind, they did not hear the ticking clock. They did not see the note in the dust. The dream also changed how he spoke to the younger generation. In university lectures and interviews, he began urging students not to wait. "Don't wait for the perfect moment," he told them. "The perfect moment doesn't exist. Move now. Build now. Act now. Because time is the one thing we never get back." It was advice drawn directly from the vision that shook him. For he knew, hesitation is the slow poison of history. But the dream did not only ignite urgency, it also ignited humility. Elon admitted once that he might never live to see Mars colonized. "But that's not the point," he said. "The point is to make sure humanity takes the first step. Even if I'm gone, if we've set the path, if we've avoided the silence, that's enough." He knew the mission was bigger than him. Bigger than Tesla, bigger than SpaceX, bigger than any single life. The tears that night were not his alone, they were humanity's. He was just the one who felt them first. As years passed, the dream transformed from pain into purpose. Whenever Elon stood before a crowd, unveiling rockets or plans for Mars, he carried the memory of that desert within him. The public saw confidence, but beneath it was vulnerability, the vulnerability of a man who had cried for a dream. And perhaps that vulnerability is what made his vision so powerful. For people don't follow machines. They follow hearts. And when the world realized that Elon Musk's heart was not in wealth, but in the survival of humanity, they began to listen more closely. Somewhere in his reflections, Elon once wrote, "If the dream that made me cry becomes the dream that makes humanity fly, then the tears were worth it." These words, tucked away in a private notebook, summed up the entire journey. The silence of Mars in his dream may have been haunting, but in reality, Elon Musk was determined that Mars would one day echo with laughter, voices, footsteps, and life. The paper in the sand would be replaced with cities of light. The note of despair would be rewritten into a message of triumph: we made it. And so, when Elon Musk admits the dream that made him cry, he is not telling a story of sadness. He is telling a story of awakening. For sometimes, the dreams that hurt the most are not meant to break us, they are meant to build us. Elon Musk once confessed to a close friend that the dream was not a single experience but a recurring one. It came back to him, sometimes in fragments, sometimes in its entirety. Always the Martian desert. Always the silence. Always the words etched into the sand, "You were late." Each time it returned, it seemed to arrive with new intensity, as though urging him not to forget. And though it frightened him at first, he began to see it differently. He began to see it not as a nightmare, but as a messenger. What if, he once wondered aloud, dreams are not just images of the past or imagination, but whispers from possible futures? What if we're being warned, not punished? That thought changed everything. When Elon shared this insight in small conversations, people looked at him with mixed reactions. Some dismissed it as poetic rambling. Others leaned forward, intrigued by the vulnerability behind the words. But those who truly listened realized that beneath the brilliance of his engineering mind, there was also the heart of someone deeply human, someone who feared losing what we all take for granted, the chance to exist. And isn't that what drove him to tears that night? The realization that the greatest loss was not his personal failure, but the failure of an entire species to seize its moment. The dream began weaving itself into his actions in ways subtle and profound. When SpaceX tested its first heavy-lift rockets, Elon stood quietly on the launch pad before liftoff. His colleagues saw a man inspecting engineering details. But in truth, he was picturing Mars, the horizon, the silence, the note, and reminding himself that this launch was another chance to change that outcome. Every bolt tightened, every system checked, every risk taken was a response to the dream. A direct rebuttal to the message, "You were late." But urgency can sometimes look like madness to those on the outside. Critics called him reckless. They accused him of setting deadlines impossible to achieve. They claimed his obsession with Mars was a distraction from Earth's pressing problems. Elon listened, but his answer remained steady: if we don't push the impossible, we'll always settle for too little. Waiting has consequences. Waiting too long could mean silence forever. Those words baffled some, but for those who understood his dream, they made perfect sense. For Elon was not racing against competition. He was racing against time. And then something remarkable began to happen. The dream that once belonged only to him began spreading, like sparks leaping from one flame to another. People across the world, from engineers to children, began to echo his sense of urgency. Teachers spoke of Mars not as science fiction, but as a near reality. Artists painted visions of red deserts transformed into blue gardens. Young innovators joined SpaceX not just for careers, but for purpose. The tears that had once fallen in the privacy of Elon's own night began to ripple outward, touching millions. The pain of the dream had become fuel for collective hope. One evening during a talk, Elon was asked, "Why Mars? Why not just fix Earth?" He paused, looked down, then answered with a softness rarely heard in his voice. "We must fix Earth. We must protect it. But history shows us, we don't always succeed. Civilizations rise and fall. Species come and go. If Earth faces a catastrophe we can't stop, what then? Do we just let silence win? Mars is not an escape, it's insurance. It's the continuation of the story." His words stirred something deeper than logic. They carried the emotional weight of a man who had cried in the dark, seeing a future where silence reigned. Over time, the dream began shaping not just his speeches, but his philosophy of leadership. Elon became more relentless with his teams, but also more transparent. He told them outright, "We are not building rockets. We are building survival. Every weld, every calculation, every test matters. Not for me. Not even for you. But for those who will come after us." Those who worked with him felt the difference. Their long nights at SpaceX were no longer just work, they were contributions to history. And though exhaustion often weighed heavy, there was a fire in their spirits that ordinary jobs could never ignite. Because they, too, had started to dream. And the fascinating thing about dreams is that they multiply. Elon's single haunting dream had planted seeds in thousands of minds. Some dreamed of Martian schools filled with children. Others of greenhouses thriving under domes. Others still of astronauts planting the first flag not in conquest, but in celebration of humanity's endurance. The silence of his vision was being rewritten, one imagination at a time. Yet Elon never let himself forget the original pain. He carried it as a reminder. He knew complacency was dangerous. He knew humanity's attention was fragile. And so, whenever momentum slowed, whenever criticism mounted, he returned in his own mind to the desert of Mars. He looked at the paper in the sand. He read the words, "You were late." And he vowed again, "Not this time. Not if I can help it." The dream also reshaped the way Elon saw his role in the grander scheme of existence. He once said, "Look, I'm not trying to be anyone's savior. I'm just trying to make sure the future is interesting." But what he meant was more profound. For an interesting future is not one where humanity fades into silence. An interesting future is one where life continues to explore, to create, to laugh, to love, to dream. And perhaps, just perhaps, the dream that made him cry was never about Mars at all. Maybe Mars was only the stage. The real message was about time, about not waiting until it's too late to do the things that matter most. Imagine this: generations from now, a child on Mars might open a history book and see Elon Musk's name. That child will never know the sound of his voice or the depth of his tears. But in their laughter, in their games, in their very existence, Elon's dream will have been fulfilled. That is the paradox of his vision. He cried not for himself, but for those he would never meet. He labored not for recognition, but for a future he would never see. And in that way, the dream was both painful and beautiful. Painful because it showed what could be lost. Beautiful because it inspired what could be gained. As the years passed, Elon continued to push. Rockets rose, prototypes failed, and new designs emerged stronger than before. And through it all, he remained haunted and inspired by the desert of Mars. He knew he might never step foot on its soil. He knew he might never personally erase the words "you were late" from its sand. But he also knew something greater, that the dream had already done its work. For by making him cry, it had made him try harder. And by admitting the dream, he had passed it to the world. So when Elon Musk admits the dream that made him cry, he is not sharing a weakness. He is sharing a map. A map not of land, but of urgency. A reminder that time is precious, that silence is avoidable, and that the future belongs to those willing to act before it's too late. And if one man's tears could awaken millions to dream bigger, then perhaps that dream was never a nightmare at all. Perhaps it was a gift. The story of Elon Musk's haunting dream does not end in silence, it ends in purpose. For what use is a dream that merely terrifies, if it does not also transform? The desert in his vision, the note in the sand, the heavy words, "You were late," they had once broken him. They had once left him shaking in the night, tears spilling from his eyes in a way he could not control. But over time, that brokenness became a blueprint. For what is invention, if not the act of rewriting destiny? What is leadership, if not the courage to carry a vision no one else can see? What is faith, if not believing that silence can be replaced by song? The years pushed forward. Falcon rockets soared and landed. Starlink satellites encircled the planet, weaving a digital net of connection. Tesla's silent cars hummed on roads once choked with fumes. And through it all, one dream remained the hidden drumbeat beneath Elon Musk's every action. The world celebrated the milestones. Journalists wrote headlines. Investors cheered. But none of them knew, not fully, that behind every launch, behind every daring experiment, was a man running against time. A man chasing a future that his dream told him could vanish. Sometimes, when asked about failure, Elon responded with unusual sharpness: "Failure is not the enemy. Delay is. We can fail and try again. But if we wait too long, there's no retry. There's just silence." Those words startled his listeners. They carried a weight that was not taught in schools, nor explained in reports. They carried the echo of the dream. And yet, as relentless as he was, Elon also carried humility. He admitted openly that he might never live long enough to see the full fruits of his vision. Maybe I'll never step on Mars, he once told an audience. Maybe I'll just help build the ship that carries someone else there. That's enough. That's more than enough. Because the point isn't who plants the first flag. The point is that we get there in time. In those moments, the dream felt less like a curse and more like a torch, one man's burden, yes, but also one man's gift to the world. And so the dream began its final transformation. It was no longer just Elon's private nightmare. It was no longer just the thing that made him cry. It had become a shared prophecy, a vision that humanity itself began to embrace. Children growing up today do not see Mars as impossible. They see it as inevitable. Not because of blind optimism, but because one man cried for a dream and refused to ignore it. Young engineers speak not of if, but of when. Teachers explain not why, but how. Artists paint not a desert, but a colony glowing under starlight. The silence that once haunted Elon has already begun to fade. For even before the first human sets foot on Mars, humanity has already reclaimed its voice, the voice that says, "We will not be late." Elon Musk admits the dream that made him cry, not to reveal weakness, but to reveal the truth, that sometimes the most powerful visions come wrapped in sorrow. That sometimes tears are not a sign of despair, but of responsibility. The desert in his dream remains etched in his memory. But perhaps one day, when humanity finally steps onto the red soil of Mars, when the first colony rises, when children run under domes filled with air and laughter, that dream will change. Perhaps then, in the quiet of another night, Elon Musk will dream again. This time, not of silence, but of sound. Not of absence, but of presence. Not of a note that says, "You were late," but of one that says, "You made it." And so, the story comes full circle. The dream that once made him cry has become the dream that makes humanity fly. And whether his name endures or fades, whether he walks on Mars or only sends others there, the truth remains: Elon Musk turned his tears into fuel, and his dream into destiny. Before we close, Elon left one final message for those who have followed his journey, supported his vision, and shared in the fire of his impossible dream.